like, share, and subscribe if you believe that kindness always wins in the end. This story will leave you speechless. Stay till the end because the truth will shock you. The school hallways buzzed with chatter, the usual mix of gossip and hurried footsteps. But amid the sea of students, there was one girl who walked with her head down, clutching her old backpack as if it were a shield. Emily Monroe. She wasn't just another quiet kid. She was the school's favorite target. Emily wore thrift store clothes, the hems fraying slightly, the colors faded from years of wear. Her sneakers had holes near the toes, patched up with tape. It was enough to make her stand out in the halls of Westwood Academy, where wealth dripped from every corner. Designer bags, luxury watches, and the latest gadgets were the standard. If you didn't fit in, you were treated like an outsider. And Emily? She was the ultimate outsider. "Hey, Emily, I think you dropped something." A voice rang out behind her. Emily barely had time to turn before a notebook came flying, smacking the ground near her feet. Laughter erupted around her. It was Tiffany Reynolds, the queen bee of the school. Tall, blonde, and always surrounded by a group of admirers who hung on her every word. She sauntered forward with an amused smirk, flipping her perfect hair over her shoulder. Beside her was Claire, her ever-loyal sidekick, giggling like a parrot. Emily swallowed hard, bending down to pick up her notebook. Before she could grab it, Tiffany's expensive heel came down on the cover, pinning it to the floor. "Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to pick that up?" Tiffany cooed, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. Emily stayed silent. She knew from experience that answering back only made things worse. Tiffany sighed dramatically. "You know, I really admire how you come to school every day looking like that. So brave." She gestured vaguely at Emily's worn-out clothes. The crowd snickered. Claire leaned in. "Yeah, like, don't you ever get tired of wearing the same thing? Do you even own anything that doesn't smell like a thrift store?" Emily's fingers curled around the strap of her backpack. Her heart pounded, but she refused to let them see her break. Just then, Jason Carter walked by, the golden boy of the school, captain of the soccer team, effortlessly cool, and, unfortunately, Tiffany's on-again, off-again boyfriend. He paused for a second, glancing at the scene. His sharp blue eyes met Emily's, and for a moment, she thought she saw something. Pity? Annoyance? But he said nothing. He just shook his head slightly and kept walking. Tiffany noticed. Her face twitched, but she quickly recovered, flipping her hair again. "Come on, guys. Let's not waste our time." She lifted her foot, letting Emily grab her notebook before strutting away, Claire and the others trailing after her. Emily exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Just a few more hours and she could escape this place. Lunchtime wasn't much better. Emily found her usual corner in the cafeteria, away from prying eyes. She unwrapped her peanut butter sandwich, taking a small bite, hoping to go unnoticed. But, of course, fate had other plans. Tiffany and her friends strolled past her table, trays full of overpriced cafeteria food. Claire suddenly gasped dramatically. "Oh my God, is that a peanut butter sandwich?" Tiffany turned, pretending to be horrified. "Emily, babe, I didn't know people actually ate those. That's like, so tragic." The table behind Emily erupted in laughter. "Maybe we should start a fundraiser for her." One of the boys snickered. Emily kept her gaze down, forcing herself to chew. Suddenly, Jason Carter spoke up. "Lay off, Tiffany." Silence. Tiffany blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Jason shrugged. "It's getting old. Find a new hobby." Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't need a savior. She just needed to be left alone. Tiffany's expression darkened for a split second before she plastered on a sweet smile. "Oh, Jason, you're so kind. But really, we're just worried about her." She batted her lashes. "Imagine what people would say if they knew our school had, like, charity cases." Emily shoved the rest of her sandwich back into her bag. She wasn't hungry anymore. The rest of the day blurred by, the insults, the whispers, the stares. But finally, the last bell rang, and Emily hurried to leave before anyone could corner her again. As she stepped outside, the cool breeze hit her, and she sighed in relief. She walked toward the edge of the sidewalk, where she usually waited for the city bus. Then the murmurs started. Wait, is that? No way. What's a car like that doing here? Emily barely registered the noise until she saw the heads turning. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided up the school driveway, its polished exterior gleaming under the sunlight. The vehicle was pristine, exuding quiet power and luxury. The driver, a man in a crisp black suit, stepped out and walked directly toward her. "Miss Monroe," he said smoothly, "your ride is ready." A hush fell over the crowd. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Claire's eyes widened. Even Jason Carter looked stunned. Emily, however, remained calm. She adjusted the strap of her bag and nodded. "Thank you, Charles." Without sparing a single glance at the sea of shocked faces, she climbed into the back of the Rolls-Royce. The door shut with a soft click. And just like that, everything changed. If you thought that was shocking, just wait. This story is only getting started. Like, share, and subscribe because the truth is about to shake everyone to their core. The moment Emily disappeared into the back of the Rolls-Royce, the entire school parking lot fell into stunned silence. Tiffany, Claire, and their entourage stood frozen, their expressions twisted with disbelief. What just happened? Claire finally sputtered, her voice barely above a whisper. Tiffany blinked rapidly, trying to process what she had just seen. Emily Monroe. Emily, the girl she had mocked for wearing secondhand clothes, for eating peanut butter sandwiches, for being a nobody, had just been picked up in a car that probably cost more than all their parents' luxury SUVs combined. Jason Carter stood nearby, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. He was the first to snap out of the trance, shaking his head slightly before turning to leave. "Guess you judged her a little too soon, huh?" he muttered as he walked past Tiffany. That stung. Tiffany clenched her jaw, her mind racing. No, this didn't make sense. Emily was poor. She had to be. The way she dressed, the way she acted, everything about her screamed low class. So why was she riding off in a Rolls-Royce like she owned the world? Inside the car, Emily exhaled slowly, finally allowing herself to relax against the plush leather seats. She felt the familiar hum of the engine beneath her, the quiet sanctuary of the tinted windows shielding her from the stares outside. "Rough day, Miss Monroe?" Charles, her family's trusted driver, asked as he maneuvered the car smoothly onto the main road. Emily smirked slightly. "You could say that." Charles glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his usual composed expression softening slightly. He had been in her family's service for years, long enough to know the full story. "Would you like me to take you straight home? Or would you prefer a stop somewhere first?" Emily glanced at her phone. A single unread text sat on her screen. "Dad, I'll be home late tonight. Important meeting. Dinner's on the way." She sighed. "Straight home, please." As the car glided through the wealthy neighborhoods, Emily stared out the window, her mind replaying the day's events. The way Tiffany and her group had laughed at her, the way Jason had spoken up. Unexpectedly, but still, it had caught her off guard. And then, of course, their faces when they saw the Rolls-Royce. That moment had been priceless. But she knew this wasn't over. The next morning, Emily walked into school with the same quiet composure she always had. But the energy in the hallways had shifted. Eyes followed her. Whispers trailed behind her. "Did you see the car she left in yesterday? There's no way she's rich. This has to be a joke. I heard her family is like royalty or something." As she reached her locker, she wasn't surprised to see Tiffany already waiting for her. This time, however, Tiffany wasn't smirking. She was watching Emily carefully, her arms crossed. "So," Tiffany started, leaning against the locker next to hers. "Are we going to talk about yesterday?" Emily calmly spun her combination lock. "I don't see why we need to." Tiffany let out a small laugh, but it wasn't her usual confident one. "Oh, come on. You seriously expect me to believe that you get picked up in a Rolls-Royce and it's no big deal?" Emily turned to face her, her gaze unreadable. "Why do you care?" That threw Tiffany off for a moment. Claire appeared next to her, looking equally confused. Because it doesn't make sense. You dress like you can barely afford lunch, and yet you have a personal driver? Who even are you? Emily closed her locker with a soft click. I'm the same person I was yesterday. Maybe you should ask yourselves why you only care now. With that, she walked past them, leaving Tiffany and Claire standing there, speechless. But Tiffany wasn't about to let it go that easily. At lunch, she made her move. She slid into the seat across from Emily's usual table, Claire right behind her. Emily barely raised an eyebrow. I don't remember inviting you. Tiffany propped her chin on her hand, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. I just want to clear something up. She paused for dramatic effect. Are you actually rich? Or was that just some kind of fluke? Emily took a slow sip of her water before answering. Why do you assume I'm rich? Tiffany scoffed. Because normal people don't get picked up in a Rolls-Royce, Emily. And normal people don't have drivers who talk like they work for a billionaire. Emily set down her bottle. So, what you're saying is, because I don't fit your idea of what a rich person looks like, you assumed I was beneath you? Tiffany's smirk faltered just slightly. I mean, well, you judged me, Emily continued, her voice quiet but firm. You bullied me, all because you thought I wasn't worth your time. But now that you think I might have money, suddenly, I'm interesting to you. Claire shifted uncomfortably, but Tiffany quickly recovered. She flipped her hair, forcing a chuckle. Oh, come on, Emily. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, Emily interrupted. And you know it. For the first time, Tiffany didn't have a comeback. Jason Carter, who had been sitting at a nearby table, was watching the exchange with interest. He had never cared much for Tiffany's antics. But this was new. Emily wasn't just surviving the conversation. She was owning it. And Tiffany hated that. After a long pause, Tiffany leaned forward. You know what? Fine. If you're so rich, then prove it. Emily raised an eyebrow. Prove it. Tiffany smirked. Yeah. Host a party or something. Show us who you really are. Claire gasped. Oh my God, yes. A party at Emily's mystery mansion. Jason rolled his eyes. This is ridiculous. But Tiffany wasn't backing down. Well, what's it gonna be? Emily? Or are you just faking it? Emily studied her for a long moment, then slowly smiled. Fine, she said. You want to see my life? Be careful what you wish for. Tiffany expected Emily to back down, to make excuses, to avoid the challenge altogether. But when Emily agreed to host the party, there was something in her voice, calm, unwavering, that sent a ripple of uncertainty through Tiffany's confidence. Still, she played it off with a smirk. Great. Can't wait to see how the other half lives, she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Emily simply nodded. I'll send the details. Then, without another word, she stood up and walked away, leaving Tiffany and Claire whispering in hushed excitement. Jason, who had been quietly observing from his usual spot, finally spoke. You just made a mistake. Tiffany raised an eyebrow. Oh, please, what's the worst that could happen? She hosts some sad little dinner party, and we all pretend to be impressed. Jason shook his head, standing up. You don't get it, do you? She's not playing your game. She's making her own rules. Tiffany watched him walk away, his words gnawing at the back of her mind. But she shook it off. Emily Monroe had been a nobody for years. One fancy car didn't change that, or so she thought. The following day, an elegant, cream-colored invitation found its way into every locker. The paper was thick, embossed with delicate gold lettering. It wasn't printed like some cheap party flyer. This was handcrafted like something out of a high society gala. Tiffany turned hers over, expecting to see a typical suburban address. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. The Monroe estate. She knew that name. Everyone did. The Monroe family was one of the wealthiest in the city. Old money, the kind that didn't need to flaunt itself. They owned half the commercial real estate downtown. Their name was on buildings, on charities, on exclusive events that no one but the elite ever got invited to. Tiffany's fingers tightened around the invitation. No, this had to be a mistake. Emily can't be that Monroe, right? Claire asked, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Tiffany said nothing, but her mind was racing. That Friday, as the sun set, luxury cars filled the long, winding driveway leading up to the Monroe estate. The house, if it could even be called that, was a mansion straight out of a magazine. Gated, surrounded by manicured gardens, with a grand entrance that gleamed under the soft glow of chandelier light spilling through massive windows. Valets, dressed in sleek black suits, opened car doors as students stepped out, wide-eyed, unable to believe what they were seeing. The sheer silence of their usual gossip spoke volumes. Tiffany and Claire arrived together, dressed to impress, but the moment they stepped out of their car, their confidence wavered. This wasn't just wealth. This was power, and Emily Monroe was at the center of it. She stood at the entrance, effortlessly composed, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit that made Tiffany's designer dress feel gaudy in comparison. "Welcome," Emily said, her voice smooth, unreadable. Tiffany forced a smile. "Nice place." Emily tilted her head slightly. "I'm glad you think so." They stepped inside, where uniformed waitstaff carried trays of hors d'oeuvres, and a live quartet played softly in the background. There was no cheap party decor, no desperate attempt to impress. Everything was understated yet impossibly refined. Jason stood by the grand staircase, watching with quiet amusement. He caught Emily's eye and gave her a small nod of approval. Tiffany clenched her jaw. She had spent years treating Emily like an afterthought, a nobody. And now, standing in her home, she realized the truth. Emily had never been beneath her. She had been above her all along. Claire leaned in, whispering, "Tiff, I think we screwed up." For the first time in a long time, Tiffany had no response. But she wasn't going to go down without a fight. Not yet. Tiffany refused to be intimidated. Yes, Emily had surprised her, but that didn't mean she was going to just hand over her place at the top. This was still her school, her social scene. Emily had spent years as a nobody, and just because she had a mansion didn't mean she suddenly belonged. So, Tiffany did what she did best. She put on a smirk, straightened her posture, and strode into the party like she owned it. She could feel eyes on her, but they weren't looking at her the way they usually did. They weren't admiring her or following her lead. Instead, there was a quiet curiosity in the room. People were watching, waiting, as if they knew something she didn't. Claire clung to her arm, whispering, "I don't like this, Tiff." "Relax," Tiffany hissed back. "We just need to remind everyone who really runs things." She scanned the room, looking for an opportunity to shift the attention back onto herself. Then she spotted the waitstaff carrying trays of food, tiny, delicate hors d'oeuvres arranged like works of art. An idea formed in her mind, cruel and precise. She sauntered over to a waiter, plucked an appetizer from the tray, and turned to Emily, who was standing nearby, talking to a few students. "Wow, Emily," Tiffany said loudly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "This party is adorable. The little snacks, the fancy music. So quaint." She popped the bite into her mouth and gave a theatrical nod. Not bad. Who knew you had this in you?" Emily remained perfectly composed. "I'm glad you're enjoying yourself." Tiffany narrowed her eyes. No flinch. No reaction. That wasn't normal. People always reacted to her. She needed to push harder. "So," Tiffany continued, circling Emily like a predator, "I have to ask, how exactly does someone like you afford all this? Because, I could have sworn you were just some broke scholarship kid a few weeks ago." She let out a small laugh. "Did you win the lottery or something?" The conversation around them quieted. People were listening. Emily, still unreadable, glanced around the room, then locked eyes with Tiffany. There was something dangerous about her gaze. Calm, patient, knowing. "My family's been in this city for generations," Emily said simply. "We've never needed to flaunt our wealth. But since you're so curious." She took a sip of her drink, her voice light but sharp. "We own Monroe Enterprises." A cold chill rushed through Tiffany. Monroe Enterprises. That was the Monroe name, the company that had built half the city, the company her own father had mentioned in meetings. Tiffany's stomach twisted, but she forced out a laugh. Oh, please, if that were true, everyone would have known by now. Emily tilted her head. Would they? Tiffany faltered. Then, as if perfectly timed, a deep voice cut through the tension. Miss Emily. The entire room turned as an older man in a crisp black suit approached. His presence commanded respect. He wasn't just some staff member. He was someone important. Emily gave him a small nod. Yes, Martin? Your father wanted me to remind you that the board members will be arriving soon. He hopes you'll greet them before dinner. Board members. Tiffany's mind reeled. This wasn't just wealth. This was power. The kind that made her family's wealth seem small in comparison. The room had gone eerily silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Emily turned back to Tiffany with an almost pitying look. Anything else you'd like to know? Tiffany felt her cheeks burn. She had walked into this house thinking she could humiliate Emily. Instead, she was the one standing here exposed. Claire tugged at her sleeve. Tiff, maybe we should. But Tiffany wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. She clenched her fists, swallowed her pride, and forced herself to smile. Oh, I was just making conversation, she said, waving a dismissive hand. No big deal. Emily didn't argue. She didn't need to, because, for the first time in her life, Tiffany wasn't the one in control. And everyone in the room knew it. Tiffany stood frozen, her mind racing for a way to salvage the moment. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, judging, waiting. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She was supposed to be the one in control, the one setting the rules. And yet, here she was, standing in Emily Monroe's grand home, completely exposed. Claire, sensing the shift in the room, tugged at Tiffany's arm. Let's just go, she whispered. This isn't our crowd. But leaving now would mean admitting defeat. And Tiffany Langston did not lose. She straightened her shoulders and forced a smirk, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling of humiliation clawing at her stomach. Well, she said lightly, this has been fun and all, but I think I've seen enough. Emily remained unreadable. Suit yourself. Tiffany turned sharply, ready to make her dramatic exit. But as she did, she nearly collided with a group of well-dressed men and women entering the foyer. They were older, poised board members, just as Martin had mentioned. One of them, a sharp-looking man in his 50s, spotted Emily and smiled. Ah, there's the young lady of the house. Emily greeted him with a polite nod. Good evening, Mr. Calloway. Tiffany's stomach twisted again. Mr. Calloway? The Calloway? The same man her father had desperately tried to get a meeting with for months? The one who had ignored every attempt? Mr. Calloway turned slightly, his gaze briefly flickering over Tiffany before he looked back at Emily. I must say, your father speaks very highly of you. Says you have quite the sharp mind for business. Emily smiled. I try to pay attention. Smart girl. He nodded approvingly before stepping away to join the other board members in the next room. Tiffany could barely breathe. Her father had been chasing these people. Meanwhile, Emily, the girl she had mocked for years, was casually hosting them. The realization settled in like a crushing weight. Emily hadn't just won tonight. She had dismantled everything Tiffany thought she understood about the social order of their school. And she had done it without even trying. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. Tiff, we really need to go. Tiffany didn't argue this time. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door, her steps stiff, her pride in tatters. Just as she reached the exit, she caught a final glimpse of Emily standing tall, poised, a quiet sense of victory in her expression. And for the first time in her life, Tiffany felt something she had never truly experienced before. Defeat. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the hum of expensive cars waiting for their owners filled the driveway. But none of them were for her. She had arrived thinking she ruled the school. She left knowing she had never even been in the same league. The end.